Hello! This yin practice has more of a restorative feel to it because the theme is a cooling practice when one is overheating or during hot weather. So the yin postures are very expansive and open. Maybe a more informal term is like they're more sprawling in nature, in which case it'll be useful to gather up as many props as you can. So blankets and pillows always a good idea. For a pose that I'm going to call Marmot Pose, which is a type of prone Shavasana, if you have a firm yoga bolster, that will be very handy. If you don't have a yoga bolster, then you can make do with pillows or blankets, or maybe not even any props. Again, it's up to you what kind of props you use and when to use them. Another posture will be banana pose, both sides, and so a soft sandbag might be useful if you have one. Also, we'll try a prone half frog pose. Again, a bolster or pillows and blankets might be useful for that posture as well. Then a supported bridge pose that I call Milky Way Pose. Now you'll need some sort of support for that one. Either some proper yoga blocks if you have them. If you don't have yoga blocks, then maybe gather up some books. Or you could also use a firm bolster if you have one of those instead. And then finally, Dragonfly at the wall. And of course you'll need some wall space for that. So see if there's any props that you would like to have, and we'll go ahead and get started. The practice begins by just sitting comfortably for a while and noticing one's breath and cultivating your inner ground. And cultivating the inner ground means just noticing your thoughts, noticing the things around you, and coming to a state of acceptance and allowance with being in the present moment. And again, noticing things that are constantly changing in the present moment, which is our breath. That's our anchor here. So good thing to just kind of soften here. Soften the breath, soften the thoughts, soften the tension in your face here. And you can either continue just being aware of your normal natural breath, or you can try what I call 4 to 6 breathing. That is a slow count of 4 as you inhale, and a slow count of 6 as you exhale. In other words, your exhale is a little bit longer than your inhale. So as you inhale, you maybe count slowly 1, 2, 3, 4. And then as you exhale, same slow cadence, but a little bit longer. So as you're exhaling, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can keep that up for a while if it's accessible. If not, just stick with your normal natural breath. The idea is with a longer exhale, it's a kind of a yin breath, in that we're using the exhale to kind of slow things down and tap into our parasympathetic nervous system here. And it's also, which means it's also tends to be cooling here, in that we're trying to come out of our fight or flight mode or sympathetic mode, because that helps to cool. So another thing you can do with your mind, with your thoughts, is I just say think cool thoughts. So if you are overheating, or if it is kind of hot weather or hot conditions, and you're trying to figure out what to do to just kind of naturally cool off and radiate body heat, psychologically you can do a lot. And so you can imagine something from your past where the conditions were just right. It was just enough coolness that it made you feel very, very relaxed and comfortable. And you have to make up the best thing to do is to make up your own visualization. I could come up with a visualization of, say, maybe an alpine scene with a waterfall and a cool breeze. Maybe that doesn't work for you, so maybe you have a different kind of visualization that you can use. So a few more breaths here, and for these final few breaths, either focus on lengthening the exhale or focus on this cooling visualization here. Whatever you come up with. And maybe you have to spend your time thinking about what that cool sensation is. In other words, think cool here. And then after your next breath, if you had closed your eyes, go ahead and open your eyes. We'll do a little bit of just a couple of yang warm-up before we get into the long yin posture. So first, just some seated twists here. I like to grow my spine long before I twist. So the way I do that is with a little bit of kind of arm movement. So extend your arms out to either side, maybe hands on the floor at first. And then when you come to your next inhale and make a slow sweeping circle with your hands until your hands kind of reach up above your arms here. And then grow your arms long, but also grow your torso and your spine long, starting from your tailbone, the base of your torso, all the way through the crown of your head. And then very gently begin to twist to one side, and your arms slowly come down. And at some point they'll either reach your legs or they'll reach the floor, or however you're sitting, find kind of maybe some good stable points for your hands. Stay here for a couple of breaths, maybe grow tall and long and nice and neutral on the inhale, and then see if there's any more twist. And if there isn't, that's fine. You've found your edge here in the twist. And then when you're ready, bring yourself back to center. We'll do the twist to the other side. So same sweeping circle first to grow everything long again. And then very gently over to the other side here. And same procedure here when you find the initial twist where you kind of feel stopped. And then see if you can create some space in your torso and see if that space allows you to accessibly twist a little bit more here. And then when you find that nice complete twist for you, maybe stay here for one more breath. And then gently release. You can do a counter twist if you need to just work out the kinks here. And then come back to center. Make your way onto your back. We're doing a pose that I'm going to just call the squeeze pose. So this is a little bit of a pre-counter pose to all the expansive yin postures that we'll be doing. So make your way onto your back, bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest. Wrap your arms around your knees as best as you can. And this is going to be a yang posture. So what I mean by yang is there's muscle engagement. There's intense muscle engagement. So you're trying to pull yourself into as little of a ball as you can here. So your head and neck raise up off the floor. That requires muscle engagement. You're pulling your head and your neck in towards your body here. You're squeezing your legs in as much as possible. So legs are squeezing in, arms are squeezing on the legs, head and neck are trying to squeeze in. And so this is intense. So just stay here for maybe one more breath and maybe really squeeze on that final breath here. So this is the opposite of, and then go ahead and release. That was the opposite of what we're going to be doing the rest of the yin class, which are open, expansive postures here. So at some point, roll over to one side. The next posture is called a prone Shavasana, which I'm going to name Marmot Pose. And this is where the title of this practice comes in. There's a little bit of Marmot Kung Fu here. I'll get us into the posture, and then while we're residing here, I'll explain why I'm calling it Marmot Pose here. So if you have that yoga bolster, now this is the time to get it. If you don't have a yoga bolster, maybe get a couple of pillows or even some blankets to substitute as a bolster. So we're going to put the bolster on the mat, and then we're just going to lay prone on the bolster with the head and the neck comfortably off of the bolster. And so you might want to have some extra padding for your head and your neck. So I'm laying with my torso on the bolster, my head and neck are comfortably off the bolster so that my forehead can rest on the floor. This gives some space for the neck, and it gives some space for the nose here. And then legs are feeling comfortable, so you might have to move them apart, feeling a little bit, and you might have to, and then you spread your arms apart. So notice this how expansive this posture is. And the idea is your limbs are far away from your torso, and this is better able to kind of for the surface area of your body to radiate heat away here. So if this is pretty comfortable here, then this is the posture. And again, if that's uncomfortable with your head on the ground, find some soft padding. Maybe put your forehead right on a pillow or a blanket. And now I have room for my nose, so my nose is not squished, so my nose can just be here and be breathing. And I don't have to turn my head to either side, although it's okay if you do have to turn your head to one side. If it gets too sore one way, remember to turn the other way. Again, arm position can be up, can be the side, can be down, hands can be up or down. You get to experiment and find your version of Marmot Pose here. And the reason why I'm calling, and we'll stay here for a few minutes. The reason why I'm calling this Marmot Pose is because I traveled to some mountains recently, and some pretty high mountains in the Rocky Mountains, and it was incredibly hot in a high altitude area of the mountain where it's not terribly hot usually. And the furry little critters that run around in that area were not used to the heat, and so they were having to deal with figuring out how to deal with the heat here. And I noticed that there was a marmot. There was a marmot who was trying to deal with the heat by laying down on a flat rock and doing exactly what we're doing right now. It just took its arms out to the side and its legs out to the side and just laid prone on the ground, trying to do its best to kind of radiate body heat. And that's what its way of radiating heat was here. And so I'm calling that Marmot Kung Fu because it was a strategy developed by an animal, a useful strategy to dump heat here. We'll probably just stay here for about halfway through. So another minute and a half. If you had your head turned one way and you need to turn it another way, this is a good time to turn it. Or just continue to just stay here and soften and release. So this is a restorative yin posture, which means what you're trying to do is allow the floor and whatever prop you're using, if you're using a bolster, to take all the weight of the pose so that you can relax your muscles. This is in keeping with the kind of the fundamental idea of yin, is relax the muscles, let either a prop or your connective tissue system bear the brunt of any stress or strain. This is a more restorative posture, so there shouldn't be too much sensation in your body. It should be mainly just the feeling of support and pressure from the floor or from the bolster here. And we're mimicking the wisdom of a marmot here for how to be expansive, how to do something that might be useful in cooling down the body. Because I saw an actual marmot do this. So I'm borrowing some good yoga, some good kung fu, if you will, from a marmot here. So maybe 3 more breaths here. And then when you're feeling ready, you can slowly bring yourself out however you would like to. So Bring yourself up and off the prop if you're using the prop here. Maybe make little motions if you need to make little motions to get your bearing again here. So we're kind of turning ourselves over onto the other side. We're flipping ourselves around. Now we're going to lie on our backs because the next couple of postures are banana pose here. Now banana pose you can either do without any props, or maybe you need a little bit of padding nearby, or if you have a sandbag, that's always useful here for banana pose. So make your way onto your back this time. So now we're kind of just, like I said, we're flipping over onto this side. So legs lengthened out long here. And then for banana pose, we're going to create a lateral bend, a side bend in the body. And the idea is to let the tension go into the side bend. And the trick when you're lying on the floor like this is to try to keep the hips flat against the floor. So right side, left side of the hip, of the pelvic bone, as close to the floor as possible, and you can use a sandbag to help kind of like encourage that. So if you have a sandbag, just lay it kindly on your left hip to remind the left hip to stay close to the ground. It doesn't have to stay on the ground, but we're encouraging it to stay as close to the ground as possible. And then start working and inching your extended legs over to the right side, so opposite side of the sandbag, until they stop here. Now normally I would cue you could go ahead and cross your legs, but if it's okay, just leave them uncrossed. Maybe you feel it doesn't look as good if they're not crossed, but that's okay. This is a yin video. You're probably at home practicing this, so it doesn't have to look spectacular here. Just going to your edge here, the stopping point here. And then you inch your torso over to the right so that you make this crest, this C shape, this crescent shape here. Arms can be overhead. You can grab hold of the left forearm with the right hand to kind of pull it up and over to get a nice stretch in that left arm and the left shoulder. But if that creates too much nerve tingling or something, then you can always do something else with the arms here. Head and neck kind of roll around in this pose. So if that created painful kinks, then unkink it by rearranging your head and your neck. You can also put a pillow underneath your head if you need to. So inch your way into your banana shape here. And this is where we're going to stay for the next few minutes. So I'll run through quickly the principles of this practice. Again, just to remind us what we're doing here. Again, we're trying to relax muscles and either let the props completely support us or let a little bit of our connective tissue support us so that our connective tissue gets a little bit of exercise. In this practice, the emphasis is more staying expansive and cool. And so maybe you want to stay a little bit on the restorative side here. So banana, we're still kind of strung out here in banana. So it's maybe a good posture to, again, continue to let our skin and our bodies just kind of radiate excess heat away here. First principle of yin practice is find your edge. Your edge is different than my edge. Your edge is that place where your body stops and starts to resist any more movement in that direction. It's not pain, it's not injury, it's just when you start feeling stuck, when you start feeling the pressure. That's your edge. The second principle is called stillness. Once you've found that edge for a still, slow-moving practice like yin, then you resolve to stay there for a while without a lot of excessive fidgeting in and out of the posture. You can adjust your posture all you want to. You can decrease or increase your edge all that you want to. Just not jumping in and out of the posture arbitrarily because you're distracted or so desperate feeling. And then finally, you stay for some time, several minutes rather than just a few breaths here, just to allow things to soak into the connective tissue system, or in this case, Just allowing some peaceful time to pass as you cool down, as you soften here. So about 1 more minute on this side of banana pose. Good time to readjust your edge, good time to check in with your breath, good time to have those cool thoughts again. Again, the first yin posture that we did, I called Marmot Pose because I'm borrowing some kung fu wisdom from a marmot that I saw in the mountains. This is not the first time people have done this. A lot of training and yoga practices came from people observing animals. Indeed, in some of the contemporary history of the development of this yin yoga practice, a lot of it was borrowed not from traditional yoga in India, but from kung fu practices in Asia, such as China. And indeed, some of the traditional postures that you see over and over again in this yin practice come from observing animals here. We're kind of done with this side of banana, so I'll tell that story when we get into the other side of banana. Bring yourself back to your center line when you get there. Take the sandbag off if you had a sandbag. Maybe do a little bit of moving around to work out any kinks that developed. Can do this nice counter pose again. Maybe not squeeze in so hard, but just bend your knees in and draw them into your chest here. For a while, you can rock from side to side, or if you're ready, you can get into the other side of banana pose. So again, if you're trying to keep your hips flat on the floor, the sandbag goes on the right side now, the other side. And then start inching your extended legs over to the left. Again, as far as they go, until they're not going anymore. And then see if you can work and inch your torso over to the left to make this crescent shape. Don't worry about how deep the crescent shape is. Worry about where you're feeling this and where you're feeling stop. And then you can decide what to do with your arms. They can go overhead. You can start stretching out through that right shoulder, right arm. And then make sure your head is in a nice accessible place here, wherever it's at. And if it's not, then give yourself permission to change it here. And then we'll settle here for another few minutes on this side of banana pose. So, some of the yin postures came from a kung fu master in China who actually was in prison. He was in solitary confinement and for many years, and this is where he developed his kung fu practice. And he only had one tiny window in his cell that looked out into the jungle. There's a jungle outside the prison facility. And all he could do was stare out this tiny little window. And when he looked into the jungle, he was watching animals and he was studying their movement, particularly monkeys. So it was from monkeys that he was trying to mimic a lot of their movement and incorporate it into his martial arts training, his kung fu training. So eventually, when he got out of prison and started teaching his martial arts that he developed, spending there, he actually called it monkey kung fu. And so that's where I get the name Marmot Kung Fu. So he learned a few tricks, learned a few kung fu moves or yoga moves from monkeys. I learned one from a marmot in the Rocky Mountains. So Marmot Kung Fu, and even though we think of this as yin yoga, it's also a type of kung fu training. So I always tell people, it's like, well, if you don't like the term yin yoga, you can always tell people that you're undergoing kung fu practice here, because this is what kung fu practitioners actually do. So we have about 1 more minute here in banana pose. So we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot of good kung fu from different animals, be it monkeys, or a furry marmot, or maybe deer, or squirrels, or maybe insects like butterflies, or maybe birds. Maybe birds have some things we can learn from. And so we don't have to just stick to just what humans might have to offer. We can look to the animal world, maybe even the plant world. Maybe plants have good ideas to keep themselves cool here. So about 4 more breaths here on this side of banana pose. A good time to check in with your internal landscape. How is your breath? How is your mental processes? How is the physical sensations that you're feeling? Are you feeling too much? Do you need to back off or come out? Or you're feeling too little? Maybe you can go deeper. Final couple of breaths here. When you're ready, we'll start to come out of this banana pose. So slowly make your way back to center, back to your center line. We're done with the sandbag. So you can take the sandbag and place it off to the side here. And then you can, a little counter pose, free form yoga, to do whatever you would like to do to work out any kind of reverberation. It's good to notice that reverberation. In fact, I'd like to say that that's maybe the 4th principle of yin, is when you come out of a long yin posture, is to notice the rebound, because a lot of the benefits from this practice come from the rebound, comes from when we're coming out of postures. We're kind of, if you think of the oversimplification of our bodies like a sponge, is we're kind of wringing out the sponge during the yin posture, and then we're releasing all of that tension and letting the sponge rebound to being the sponge. We'll get set up for the next yin posture, which is, I actually don't have a name for this, so I'm calling it a prone half frog pose, because that's just what it looks like to me. This is a very mild hip opener, laying on one's belly, and I'll demonstrate this posture without any props, although you might find this more accessible if you have some props. So for prone half frog pose, lay on your belly with your legs comfortably extended out behind you. And then what you will do is bend your right knee and drag that right thigh so that it's perpendicular to your torso here. So what I've done is I've externally rotated my hip socket here. And then I've bent my hip 90 degrees, I've bent my knee 90 degrees, so that my thigh and my shin kind of 90 degrees to each other. It doesn't have to be 90 degrees exactly. You just basically move this leg up with the knee bent as much as you can until it stops. So this is the posture, and then you just rest comfortably here. However you would like to on the floor, you might need pillow. Now, for some of us, maybe this is too much intensity underneath that knee or that ankle. And maybe we just can't get it up here because of the way our hip is built. So an alternative to this is to generate a little bit of height underneath the torso. So if you have that bolster, you can use the bolster. Maybe the knee is protesting because it's too hard on the ground, so you can put a blanket here so the knee has something a little bit softer. So again, you can rest your torso on the bolster. This gives your hip a little bit more room to maneuver. This gives your knee and your ankle a little bit more softness here. So you can also practice this posture with this a little bit of a sit-up, and maybe this is more accessible for you to do it that way here. So we'll stay here for a couple more minutes. Your way, either with these props, or if it's okay, without the props. You can just stay here. And again, like I said, the this is a more restorative themed class. So the idea is you don't need a lot of sensation for this class, for this sequence. You're just trying to stay expansive and open, and just allowing yourself to soften and slow down. And during these long holds, maybe go back to the psychological visualization of cool thoughts. Go back to that cool, happy place that you have developed in your own mind. Maybe it's something you remember from the past, or if not, then create one of your own. Use your imagination and decide what would be a perfect place where I felt cool but still comfortable here. What are the conditions? Is it beside cascading water? Is there a cool breeze? Or what's your envision? Is there snow? Does it need to be that cool here? By the way, arms are comfortable. So you can have your arms out up overhead, you can have them out to the side, and farther away, more expansive this posture feels. This is an asymmetrical posture, so we do the other side to it here. And part of this is just allowing the floor to support you, to soften and settle down, and to let things quiet. Your breath is quiet. Thoughts can be cool and quiet here. So since I've been talking about Kung Fu, or alluding to Kung Fu practice, it's very interesting. We live in a very yang world, so we think it takes a lot of effort and intensity to create muscle fitness and muscular strength. You have to do all kinds of yang training, all kinds of fitness and exercise training to get the muscles in shape, to get to where you can be very, very active and energetic. And that's true. You have to do that. What's not so obvious to us is that it takes the same amount of intense training to actually relax and to release and soften. It really does take training and effort and practice to soften and to truly relax here. So just one more breath here on this side. And then maybe gather yourself in. So maybe arms come in. Maybe you pull the right leg back here. And then if you need to, you can get up, do a few counter poses here, or come into the other side of prone half frog. Maybe some cat and cows would feel good right now. So you can come back to hands and knees and do a few cat and cows. And then when you're ready, just bring yourself into the other side. And again, maybe you need some pillows or a blanket under uncomfortable pressure points. But now it's the other leg that's straight, and the other leg will bend at the hip and at the knee, just as much as you can until you feel a stopping point here. So maybe if you're really flexible, you got your knee clear up by your shoulder here. Maybe if you're kind of normal, flexible, maybe the knee doesn't quite make it up to the level of the hip. That's fine. Again, we're not worried about what this posture looks like. And then find your version of this posture again here. And we'll stay here for, again, this is, for some of us, this might be intense. For some of us, this is going to feel really gentle. Give yourself permission to let it feel really gentle here. This is again, I call it prone half frog pose because it is a modified version of frog. Now, full frog pose is usually pretty intense for most people. This is a way to get the same hip opener on one side of the hip or one side of the leg without having to do that usually really intense posture of full frog. And then just settle here and soften again. So at one point in my life, when I was practicing a lot of yoga, I also got interested in Tai Chi. And I started taking Tai Chi lessons from a Tai Chi instructor that was teaching at the same studio where I was teaching and taking yoga classes. And it was wonderful because I learned a lot about the tradition of Tai Chi. So Tai Chi is kind of a meditative and mindful version of a martial arts practice, of a kung fu practice. Tai Chi is considered a type of kung fu. And as I was practicing this particular form of Tai Chi that the instructor was teaching was drawing in other martial artists. So even though I was kind of a yoga type person who was interested in yoga, I found my fellow practitioners were actually mainly martial artists who were coming in just to simply learn another form of martial arts or another form of kung fu in the form of this Tai Chi. And so that's what we would be doing. And so when we practiced and when we discussed how practice was going, of course, I was always coming from basically a yoga perspective. It's like I was always comparing the Tai Chi practice and energy and how I was feeling to yoga practices. Whereas the martial arts people in class were often discussing how this Tai Chi fits in with their other martial arts practices. Much of them, of course, much more vigorous, much more intense, but a lot of similarities to yoga practices here. So about maybe a half a minute more here, so 5 or 6 more breaths on this side of half frog. Remember, yin is a very allowing and accepting practice. That means you can stay as long as you want to in a posture. You can come out earlier in a posture, depending on your state, how your physical sensations, your mental sensations, your emotional state. You take that all into consideration and decide if you need to change your edge or if you need to stop practicing altogether here. And that's true if it's an intense yang posture, but it can also be true if it's a restorative type yin posture that you felt you've stayed too long in here. But we'll go ahead and slowly come out here. So take your time, gather yourself up, and then slowly bring yourself up and out. We'll do a little bit of a yang counter pose here. I'm going to suggest downward facing dog, just to get some of the blood flowing back, just to engage the core here a little bit. So hands and knees, hands are shoulder width or slightly farther apart. Tuck your toes under and then press and lift your hips up towards the ceiling. Extend your arms, your torso, and your legs, and you might have to readjust feet and hands to accommodate that. We're trying to go for a nice neutral spine. So in order to do that, if your legs have to be bent, maybe your elbows even have to be bent, or maybe you have to rearrange hands and feet again. So all that can happen here. Maybe 1 or 2 more breaths here in downward facing dog. So again, a yang pose here. And then go ahead and simply release. And from here, we're moving into another supine posture that's a back bend that I call Milky Way Pose. And it's a type of supported bridge pose, so you'll need props for this one. I normally use a couple of yoga blocks that I have. Again, you can use books. You can also use a bolster. If you have that firm bolster and you were using it for the other postures, you can use it for this posture too. So I'll demonstrate with the blocks. You'll make your way onto your back. Have the blocks handy on either side. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, and then lift your hips up and place a block or a couple blocks underneath the back of your pelvic bone, so your low back here. So I got 2 blocks in kind of an inverted V shape.
this is for stability. Now I have them on the high side, which is kind of the extreme side. But maybe that's good just to demonstrate what this posture looks like here. And then you can either do one leg at a time or both legs. Some of us, maybe we have to keep both knees bent. The idea is to lengthen out both legs so you get this stretch through the front of the psoas here. And if this is too intense for you, it probably means it's just too high. So you use a lower setting of the blocks. For some of us, even lower settings on the hard blocks is a little bit much. So instead of the blocks, you can use the bolster. So same procedure, get the bolster ready. Feet on the floor, lift the hips up, put the bolster crossways underneath your pelvic bone, and then lengthen out your legs here. So you're making this height, put your body in a slight back bend rather than a forward bend or a neutral spine here. So find something that works here. Find a height that works for you here. And so I'll go back again. This is the highest height and probably doesn't work for a lot of people. So you maybe want to keep the blocks on the medium or the low setting here. Legs are relaxed, so if they flop out to either side, that's fine. Arms can either be along your side, can be out to the side, they can be up overhead, so you get to decide where they are. And if your head doesn't like the hard floor, put a pillow underneath your head. And then we'll stay here for a few more minutes here. So one of the martial artists that was in the Tai Chi class that I was in, he was one of these guys who had been studying for decades, different martial arts, and he had come to the Tai Chi class because this was a form of Tai Chi that he didn't know and he wanted to learn it, among other things. And it got to the point where we were talking about how to relax the body and what one needed to do. And he was telling me that the really serious Kung Fu and martial arts experts back in the East, back in Asia, the ones who want to become lifelong Kung Fu experts, they knew the importance of relaxation and how to truly relax the entire body. And they also realize that it's not easy. So he says most of them undergo an extremely intensive training of 100 days. Says it takes them 100 days of intense training to really figure out how to completely relax. It's that hard to figure out how to do. It takes true martial arts and Kung Fu experts 100 days of focused, intense training to figure out how to relax. Except for us, we only have about a minute to do what they do in 100 days to figure out how to relax in this pose. So this is what you need to focus on, is what do you need to do? What is your Kung Fu to find some sort of stillness, some sort of softness in this back bend here? Even when there's maybe uncomfortable pressure points, even when there's uncomfortable thoughts. That's the Kung Fu. That's the yoga. So just a couple more breaths here. When you're ready to come out of this posture, first thing to do is bend your knees if they're not already bent. Put your feet back onto the floor. Maybe arms come in close. Root through your shoulders and your feet. And then engage your core and your legs to lift yourself up enough so that you can reach and grab the props with your hands and then pull the props out. And then with control, slowly lower the rest of your torso all the way to the ground. Maybe put your props off to the side. And then a little bit of a counter pose here. Maybe reclined windshield wipers. So feet move wide apart, so away from each other. And then lower your knees over to one side. Very gently lift them back up to center. Lower them to the other side. Now you kind of get the gist of this, so you can slowly windshield wiper, kind of just cycle slowly back and forth from side to side to kind of hopefully release some pressure in the low back after that back bend here. And then when you've done this for a while, slowly roll over to one side, and we'll get set up for the next in posture, which is Dragonfly at the wall. Now, Dragonfly is basically with your legs extended and then coming out wide. So this is regular Dragonfly. I'll just demonstrate this without props. This is seated Dragonfly, and if you love this posture, maybe try this. But if you do have some wall space, then make your way to the wall space. And I'm going to demonstrate this with a bolster. But you'll have to decide whether you want something underneath your hips or whether it's better to just not have anything here. So you might have to experiment with props here. I'm placing the bolster up against the wall. And then I'll sit sideways. So the hardest part getting into legs up the wall or this posture is getting the legs up the wall. So you sit to the side and then I spin myself up with my legs extended up. So this is the legs up the wall pose. Notice my pelvic bone, my hip bone is on the firm bolster. I want it that way to kind of give my pelvic bone a little bit of support and my lumbar a little bit of bend here. But you might find that that's too much, in which case take the bolster away. Just do this without the bolster. You can put a blanket underneath your hips here, or maybe a pillow here. It's good to get your hips as close as you can to the wall, but if you have a lot of tightness in the backs of your legs, probably won't get them there, and that's fine here. And then for Dragonfly, you just move your legs apart as far as they go until they stop for you here. And by the way, if this is too intense, but you like regular Dragonfly, come out of this, do regular Dragonfly. Or another option is just do legs up the wall. Keep your legs together here. Other things you can do is I'm just using the floor here, but you can have padding underneath your torso and your head. You can have a blanket under your torso. You can have a pillow underneath your head. Arms, again, maybe expand them out to either side. They can either be near your torso or all the way out here. Again, sticking with the theme for this class is expand and cool here. So again, this is another expansive posture where I have kind of my limbs going on different directions. This is maybe the upside down version of Marmot Pose here. And then we'll go ahead and settle here. Final couple of minutes in these long held yin postures before a final resting pose, just to so find your breath again. You can go back to this 4 to 6 breathing if you like that, where you just watch your breath and just have a nice long 4 count inhale, and then a nice long 6 count exhale. And all the while you're keeping track of your sensations to make sure they don't get too intense. So for some of us, this can be an intense pose through our inner legs here. It can maybe even be intense in our low back. So Notice where the physical sensations are. Send your breath there. Send cool, soft thoughts there. And you can even go back to this visualization of a cool environment. Something where you don't get overheated, wherever that is for you. Since we're all different, and we all have different physical constitutions, we feel cool at different stages. Maybe some people are on a very warm, hot, and sunny beach, but because of their own constitution, they already feel cool. And so maybe that's their visualization for cool. Maybe for other people, you have to be maybe in some snowy, icy Arctic region where there's sub-zero temperatures. That's the only way they can be cool. And that's fine too. So what's your cool? What's your perfectly refreshing here? And as you're thinking about that, you can also feel heat energy just kind of radiating, expanding out through the surface area of your skin, your body here. Maybe that helps you to slow your mind down, cool your thoughts. Maybe slow your breath down. So 3 or 4 more breaths here. And then when you're ready to come out, maybe slightly bend your knees, bring your feet back up to legs up the wall, and you can go ahead and use your hands to move your legs back up here. Once you're there, you can bend your knees, put your feet on the wall here, and you can either maybe push and slide yourself away, and then when you're ready, slowly roll yourself to one side. When you get to laying on your side, maybe stay there for a moment just to recalibrate your orientation here. So you don't have to jump up out of this after you've been here for a breath or two. Slowly make your way up, and then make your way back onto your back. We'll integrate with a few spinal twists again, and then we'll finish with a resting pose. So when you find your way to your back, bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest, maybe give them a hug, and then we'll go ahead and keep the knees bent and then allow them to lower over to one side. Allow the opposite shoulder to melt back towards the opposite side here. So if you ended up on the side of your torso, we're trying to create a back bend, and we do that by melting the torso back the opposite direction of the knees here. And then that arm can come out into kind of a cactus arm or a T position here. And then you just stay here for maybe another breath or so. And then when you're ready, slowly bring the knees back up to center. And then they keep on going to the other side as you melt that other opposite shoulder towards the ground. Maybe that arm comes out to the side here. And head and neck are comfortable. They can stay neutral, or you can turn your head and neck away from the knees for a little bit of a twist up in the neck or the cervical spine here. And then very gently, knees come back up to center. Maybe give your knees one final hug, or any other kind of little movements that you would like to make. So this is a little bit of free-form yoga before final resting pose, final Shavasana. And I'm going to suggest for Shavasana today, just a traditional version of Shavasana where you're lying on the floor, legs fairly wide apart, maybe 1.5 feet apart here, or 2 feet apart. Arms to the side. You can have arms overhead in 5-pointed star pose, or arms to the side here. Again, in the posture with a nice neutral spine on a firm surface like the floor. And then limbs just radiating out to the side like a star, like a 5-pointed star here. And if you're not really into this lying on the floor like this, then find your favorite restorative posture for resting. And this is where we'll stay. So final rest. So begin your kung fu practice of relaxation. Me, I'm a little bit of a logical person, so I have a checklist and I go through that checklist here. So it starts up in my head and in my face. So I soften my jaw, the inside of my mouth. I soften the outside of my mouth. I soften my chin, my cheeks, the areas around my ears, and then my eyes. Soften the eye sockets, soften the space between the eyes, and soften the forehead and the temples, the entire head, and the crown of the head. And then I go inside and can soften your brain, soften the neurons. Let the thoughts be there, but let them drift freely. No judgment or criticism. Let them be fuzzy, let them drift in, whatever they are. And eventually they'll drift out. That can take some kung fu practice to figure that one out. And then soften down through your neck and your upper shoulders. Release your arms, arm, right palm, right fingers. Left arm, left palm, and left fingers. See if you can notice the tips of your fingers. See if you can notice a sense of energy there in the tip of each finger on both hands, left and right. Soften down through your torso, your rib cage, abdomen, down through the back of your spine, front of your navel. Soften through your hips and the fronts and backs of your thighs, knees, your lower legs, shins and calves. Release your ankles, your heels, tops and bottoms of your feet, and finally soften all of your toes on both feet. And see if you can notice that same sense of presence of energy in the tips of each toe. Notice that energy radiating out through the very tips of your toes, the tips of your fingers, the crown of your head, essentially your whole being, so radiating that energy out into the universe. Release, relax, and surrender your body-mind 100%. And feel as if you're slowly sublimating into the cool air around you. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. You can start to make little motions, maybe gently rock your head back and forth, or make little movements with maybe fingers and maybe toes, and then start increasing that movement into hands, into feet, into arms, into legs. At some point, gently bend your knees and roll over onto one side. When you get there, settle there for a moment, long enough to cultivate a deep sense of gratitude for your practice and your efforts, but also a deep sense of gratitude for you, your unique embodiment in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you're here. And then when you're ready, come back up into a comfortable seat. When you feel stable there, remind yourself, cultivate your inner ground one last time, and then bring your hands together at heart center. So I'll end the practice with an Om. You can either listen or maybe join in. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.